1998. Sex, KGB, and Offshore Millions. How Clinton, Putin, and Lazarenko changed the world. Chapter 1. Ukraine, the era of survival and political wars. The year 1998 for Ukraine became a period of manual government control, where against a backdrop of mass poverty, the largest redistributions of power, influence, and property in the country's history took place. Viktor Yushchenko, the shadow of Soros, and the financial maneuver. In 1998, Viktor Yushchenko, who held the post of chairman of the National Bank of Ukraine, NBU, became a key figure that the West was betting on. His connection with George Soros was subtle but decisive. Through the International Renaissance Foundation, Soros effectively sponsored groups of Western advisors and consultants who worked inside the national bank and the government. Yushchenko carefully but firmly promoted the liberal monetarist policy lobbied by Soros. This allowed Ukraine, unlike Russia, to avoid total chaos. When the default happened in the Russian Federation, Yushchenko applied iron fist tactics, sharply raising the discount rate and introducing currency restrictions. This practically suffocated domestic business, but it allowed the hryvnia to be kept from an uncontrollable fall. The exchange rate rose from 2 to almost 4 hryvnias per dollar, but did not collapse into an abyss. Thanks to Yushchenko's authority in the West, in September 1998, the IMF approved an EFF program for $2.2 billion, which became an oxygen mask for the country. The case of Pavlo Lazarenko and UESU. The confrontation between President Leonid Kuchma and former Prime Minister Pavlo Lazarenko reached its peak. Lazarenko, being the leader of the opposition party Hromada, represented a real threat to the authorities. In December 1998, he was detained in Switzerland on charges of money laundering. This event exposed the colossal corruption schemes of the United Energy Systems of Ukraine, UESU, corporation, and became the beginning of the collapse of his empire, which later ended with his flight and a prison sentence in the USA. The murder of Vadim Hetman, April 22, 1998. The murder of the #1 banker and Yushchenko's mentor in the elevator of his own home was a real shock. Hetman was the brain center of the financial system and a bridge between the old Soviet school and the new capitalists. His elimination was linked to the redistribution of the banking sector before the privatization of the largest state-owned objects. The mining crisis and the March of Helmets. The coal industry was in a coma. Production fell to 76 million tons, compared to 164 million in 1990. Wage arrears to miners reached an astronomical 3 billion hryvnias. In July 1998, thousands of Donbass miners marched on Kiev on foot, setting up a tent city under the cabinet of ministers and the presidential administration. The whole world saw the footage of exhausted workers banging their helmets on the asphalt. The tragedy reached its peak in Luhansk, when miner Oleksandr Mikhайловich committed an act of self-immolation due to the impossibility of feeding his family. Sex 1.0. Political alignment and church schism. The elections of March 29, 1998, led to a left-wing revenge. The Communist Party of Ukraine, CPU, received 121 mandates. This paralyzed the work of the Rada, the Speakeriad, until Oleksandr Tkachenko was elected speaker. At the same time, there was a tough confrontation between the UOC MP and the UOC KP, often turning into violent clashes and seizures of churches in the regions. Football and national pride. Against the backdrop of the crisis, the only bright spot was the victories of Valery Lobanovsky's Dynamo Kiev. Reaching the quarterfinals of the Champions League and defeating world giants like Arsenal and Real Madrid became the main national idea uniting the country. Chapter 2. Russia, the Great Default and the Rise of the Silovik. For Russia, 1998 became the point of no return, after which preparation began for a complete change in political course and the dismantling of the 90s system. The appointment of Vladimir Putin, July 25, 1998. Putin was appointed director of the FSB of the Russian Federation. This came as a surprise to many. Boris Yeltsin was looking for a loyal person from the special services system, not involved in public scandals, to protect the president's family from opposition attacks and impeachment. Putin immediately began a radical purge of the FSB apparatus, strengthening counterintelligence and preparing the department for the role of the main pillar of the future vertical of power. Chronicle of the Default, August 17, 1998. Black Monday. The government of Sergei Kiriyenko, who was nicknamed Kinder Surprise, declared a technical default. This happened just 3 days after Yeltsin's assurances. There will be no devaluation. I say this firmly and clearly. The ruble collapsed from 6 to 24 per dollar by the end of the year. Real losses of people, monthly salaries. It was a crushing blow to the population. Before August 1998, the average salary in Russia was about $180 a month. By December of the same year, it fell to $45 to $50 a month. About 20 million depositors completely lost their savings in collapsed banks, such as SBS Agro and Income Bank. Inflation for the year was 84.4%, and prices for medicines and imported products soared by 200 to 300%. Sergei Mavrodi and MMM in 1998. On September 22, 1998, JSC MMM was officially declared bankrupt. But Mavrodi, even being on the international wanted list, launched his new scam on the internet, stock generation. This was a virtual stock exchange, the victims of which were no longer only residents of the CIS, but also hundreds of thousands of Americans and Europeans who were not familiar with Mavrodi's methods. Political leapfrog and Yevgeny Primakov. Yeltsin changed the government 3 times in a year. After Kiriyenko's failure in September, Yevgeny Primakov became prime minister. The former head of intelligence became a fireman who calmed the Duma and the army and began a slow stabilization of the economy. The murder of Galina Starovoytova, November 20th, 1998. The shooting of the Democratic leader in the entrance of her house in St. Petersburg showed that the political struggle in Russia had finally moved to the criminal plane. Burial of the Romanovs and space Zarya. On July 17th, the remains of Nicholas II were buried in St. Petersburg, which Yeltsin called an act of repentance. And on November 20th, despite the economic collapse, Russia launched the Zarya module, beginning the construction of the ISS, confirming its status as a space power despite the bankruptcy of the economy. Chapter 3. USA. Intimacy in the White House and Rocket Maneuvers. The year 1998 in the USA was a period of paradox, an economic boom against the backdrop of the deepest political and moral crisis. The Oval Office scandal and the blue dress. The whole world followed the Monica Lewinsky case. Intimate meetings took place directly in the Oval Office of the White House and adjacent premises. The key evidence against President Bill Clinton was Lewinsky's blue dress with traces of the president's DNA. An ironic coincidence. On August 17, 1998, the very day the default was announced in Russia, Bill Clinton became the first sitting U.S. president to testify before a grand jury via video link. On December 19th, the House of Representatives impeached him for perjury and obstruction of justice. Pfizer shares and the Viagra effect. In March 1998, a drug for erectile dysfunction received FDA approval. It was an explosion. Pfizer's market capitalization increased by $30 billion in just a few months, and the share price practically doubled. Operation Desert Fox. Wag the dog. In December 1998, the U.S. began massive bombings of Iraq. The official reason was that Saddam Hussein was hiding weapons of mass destruction. However, the start of the strikes coincided with the day of the vote on Clinton's impeachment. Critics called it Operation Wag the Dog, using war to distract the nation's attention from a sex scandal. No weapons were found in Iraq at that time. The Jonesboro tragedy, Arkansas. On March 24th, 2 children, aged 11 and 13, opened fire on classmates, killing 5 people and wounding 10. This was one of the first mass school shootings, causing a fierce national debate in the USA about the ease of access to weapons. The boys stole the arsenal from their grandfather, and the influence of violent games on children. The death of Frank Sinatra, May 14, 1998. At the age of 82, the legendary singer and actor, the voice of America, passed away. Frank Sinatra was an 11-time Grammy winner and a symbol of an entire era whose voice sounded in every American home. His passing marked the final conclusion of the classic age of Hollywood and pop music. For the younger generation, it was the departure of the last titan of the old world. Chapter 4: World Events, the Digital Frontier and New Justice. The world of 1998 was in anticipation of the millennium, creating new legal institutions and technological standards. The Rome Statute, the birth of global justice. On July 17, 1998, an international treaty was adopted at a diplomatic conference in Rome, the Rome Statute. It became the foundation for the creation of the International Criminal Court, ICC. For the understanding of the youth, this is the first permanent court
in history that has the right to try the highest officials of any state for the most serious crimes: genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. The birth of the euro and the cunning move of Great Britain. On June 1st, 1998, the European Central Bank, ECB, began its work. 11 European states began the transition to a single currency, the euro, giving up German marks and French francs. Great Britain, being a major player, demonstratively kept the pound sterling, remaining financially autonomous. In the future, the new currency was awaited by real American coasters on the global markets. The triumph of Apple and Steve Jobs. In 1998, the company introduced the iMac G3, a computer in a semi-transparent colored case that became a sales hit. This allowed Apple for the first time in a long while to make a net profit, more than $300 million, and avoid collapse. Steve Jobs officially returned the company to the game. Windows 98 and the blue screen of death, an embarrassment. During the official presentation, Bill Gates's computer froze, issuing a blue screen of death right in front of the cameras. Despite this anti-advertising, Microsoft sold 15 million copies of the system in the first 6 months, thanks to support for USB and the Internet. Google and the gaming industry. On September 4th, Google Incorporated was officially registered in a rented garage. The company's first servers were assembled from cheap components using parts from a Lego constructor. In the same year, cult games were released. Half-Life, 1.5 million copies sold in the first year, and the strategy StarCraft, 11 million copies, which actually created the modern esports industry. FIFA World Cup. France? The tournament ended with the triumph of the hosts. The French national team in the final crushed the favorites, Brazil, with a score of 3-0. More than 1 million people took to the streets of Paris. It was the most massive celebration since the Second World War. Y2K panic. Year 2000 problem. The world community spent about $300 billion on software updates, fearing that with the onset of the year 2000, computer systems around the world would fail and lead to global chaos. Conclusion. Friends, we are truly glad that you have walked this difficult path through the labyrinths of 1998 with us. We have lived through these dramatic moments together. From the silence of the Oval Office to the clatter of miners' helmets. From the collapse of great empires to the birth of technological giants. The 90s are an era that cannot be understood all at once, and we will continue to navigate this time, gathering the truth bit by bit that many would prefer to forget. Stay with us, subscribe to the channel, and hit the like button if you value depth and honest history. There are many more important discoveries ahead that we will make together, here and now.